You are listening to the podcast of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors, external contributors, and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.
If we think about Africa, we tend to form an image of vast green rainforests or endless deserts, overpopulated cities or uninhabited wilderness areas, wealthy minds and starving children, historic great civilization and fallen states that are under sanguinary civil wars. What we usually forget is that Africa is now the most dynamically changing continent on Earth. According to United Nations data, its population will double by 2050 and quadruple within a century. At the same time, 7 out of 20 economies with the highest real GDP growth in 2023 were African, and the amount of foreign direct investments arriving to the continent is on a rising path too, despite a major setback during the pandemic. All in all, Africa is rapidly becoming one of the most important playgrounds of the coming decades. Can the unification of Africa be the solution for the rising continent? Hello and welcome to the newly released Diplomacy's podcast, second episode. I am Marton Szücs, and I am talking to Mr. Nyandoro Omuria. My guest is a lecturer at Egerton University, Kenya. He's an expert and consultant in public policy formulation and analysis. His research interests are in the areas of state security, terrorism, counterterrorism, and violent extremism in the Horn of Africa and the Great Lakes region. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Today, we will talk about the possibilities of Africa, but first, let me have a quick word about Diplomacy. Diplomacy is a student-run project under the auspices of Mathias Corvinus Collegium. Our project's main activity is dealing with foreign affairs. We organize events and write articles concerning international political environments regularly. In this podcast, we will touch on the Pan-African movement, its past and its future, further examine the situation of the individual countries in the example of Kenya, and finally, look at the Pan-African movement's relation towards the international environment. First up, I would like to ask Mr. Omuria to briefly define Pan-Africanism. Is it the intention of uniting the continent, or just a movement which endorses the feeling of brotherhood among people of African origin all over the globe?
The Pan-African movement is a movement which was concerned and developed by Africans living outside Africa in the 19th century. In Africa, it was expressed by armed resistance and struggle against colonialism. So it sums up that the Pan-African movement is for the African people or the black people who are outside the continent for various reasons, but majorly due to the slavery at that time, and now they wanted to create an identity and a culture and then focus going back home to Africa. And in so doing, they wanted to unite all the peoples of the black race outside Africa and focus on going back to Africa and doing African things wherever they are. So it aimed at the unification of Africans as a nation in the 20th century and beyond.
And what do you think is the main importance of Pan-Africanism for the international order today?
The main importance, which I can summarize it as the black people who come from Africa and their descendants who are outside Africa, is the unity of purpose so that the black people get one voice in doing all their things together. In so doing, it emphasizes on unity and creating up a black nation without borders, and which focuses on improving the lives and livelihoods of the black people. And that's the main reason why we had the concept of Pan-Africanism.
And how does it affect the international environment?
It affects the international environment because Africa is a huge country, is a huge continent with 1.4 billion people at the moment. So no country or no force or no power can overlook the fact that this is a huge population which will determine some huge population and a youthful population, which in the near future will determine how the economic progress of the world goes. So it's very important that the Pan-Africans and it's very important that the Pan-Africanism in the national arena must hear the black voices of the black people in all agendas, be it security, be it peace, be it economy, because they are part and parcel of the whole process.
What is the current state of Pan-Africanism and the African continental integration?
Pan-Africanism led to the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. We have had Pan-African conferences which were started off in the United States of America in 1900. Then the first, second, third, and fourth Pan-African conferences were held as the African states were going to independence in the 1960s. Then they came together and formed the Organization of African Unity. So they integrated and connected all peoples of Africa. All nations and countries in Africa came together under the Organization of African Unity, which later on in 2002 molded to form the African Union. So the integration of the people into one, to have one voice in airing their views and grievances and in marketing the continent comes back to Pan-Africanism and now to the creation of the African Union.
And what do you think? Is this process different compared with other continental cooperations and integrations?
Other processes of continental integrations, basically the Pan-Africanism is the root matter of this. So other continental operations are the offshoots, are the children, if I can say so, of Pan-Africanism. The continental integration movements which we have currently, they all trace their roots to Pan-Africanism. They all trace their roots to having a united Africa at some point in future. And that's what everybody actually thinks and looks to working to, a greater Africa and a greater nation of Africa.
And how do you personally relate to the unification movement of the continent?
The unification movement in the continent is not smooth, it's rough, because of the boundaries and the borders which were created by the Europeans during the scramble and the partition of Africa. So these borders, artificial as they may be, they are the ones which are internationally recognized. So the unification of the movement is a bit difficult because of the divide and rule tactics which have been employed in Africa, where the continent is separated into major blocks, where we have the Arab bloc in North Africa, we have the Francophone West Africa and all Francophone West African countries, and we have the Anglophone countries, which are the major countries in East, West, and South Africa. So coming up with a united Africa, these interests emanating from the colonialists or the former colonial powers, where the Francophones align themselves to France, the Anglophones align themselves to the United Kingdom, and the Arabs in North Africa align themselves to the Middle East. So there's a clash of interests, wants, and desires by these blocks, and making it difficult to unite. However, steps have been taken to mediate over the same, so that the continent comes with one voice, and that's where now the African Union comes in, where majority of these countries, in fact all of these countries, irrespective of their alignment, either Francophone, either Arabic or Anglophone, are all now united in one voice in the African Union, where they all subscribe to.
You described Africa's situation in one of your lectures as a cohabitation with people from other ethnicities in forced marriages within often artificial borders. The question is, do you think that a more united continent would be able to solve those ethnical conflicts that the current system is unable to?
Africa is composed of different thousands of nations, of people with different cultures, different values, different backgrounds. And it is really a tall order because of what the Africans were taught and what they think is possible. However, the African people can overcome these ethnic divisions, as we have seen before. The forced marriages in countries where you find one ethnic tribe or one ethnic community is divided at the border and belongs to different countries, which brings about a problem of identifying where one is royal to, and is it the country or is it the ethnic tribe. A Maasai Kenyan and a Maasai Tanzanian, for example, their loyalty will be to the Maasai nation and not to the Maasai Kenyan or the Maasai Tanzanian. That's just an example. So yes, there are conflicts in the system, and these systems and these conflicts can be meditated, but as we have seen before, the countries now exist, they are stable, and so if the countries where they were forced into, we are stable in them, the Africans are stable in these countries. Yes, there may be problems, there may be a lot of disagreements, but generally the people can identify now with their countries or states. So in a nutshell, I'm saying that the African people from different ethnic tribes can forego the ethnic lens, can forego the tribal lens, so as to have a united people with a common ambition, and so that to drive their agenda as a common people.
Yeah, we know how diverse Africa ethnically is, so yeah. However, the continent is undoubtedly moving towards unification with such organizations as the aforementioned Africa Union or the other regional economic and political organizations such as the ECOWAS on the west or the EIC on the east. How do you see the future of such organizations?
These organizations, multinational organizations, are very important to the development of Africa in terms of regional and economic and political integration. The major goal of these economic blocks or regional blocks, if I may call them, for example, ECOWAS for West African states, is in future to have a common market, a monetary union, and a political federation of all the countries. So this means that the integration from regional points of view, where people may have a similar culture and a similar view of life, is very important to the eventual integration of the whole of Africa. The same can be said of the East African community, where the overall goal is to have a political union, and same can be said of the South African Development Community, and where the trading blocks, the trading blocks and rights and the tariffs will be eased within these blocks, regional blocks, so that we have seamless trade, seamless movement of people, and eventually, once each regional block has achieved its mandate or has achieved its goals, then it will be easier to integrate the blocks or the regional blocks into a one Africa agenda. I'll say that once ECOWAS achieves its ultimate goal of a political union, same to the East African community, same to the South African Development Community, then we'll be having regions, 3 or 4 regions representing the whole of Africa, which are federal states in themselves, and now the political union of the African Union will be formed. It's a reality, though we have a lot of time to get there.
What do you think, whether those regional cooperations are strengths or backlashes of the African integration?
The regional blocks are strengths because they want to consolidate themselves into one voice. For example, I have an East African passport, which means that I can access all the East African countries visa-free. The same applies to the ECOWAS, and the same will apply to the South African Development Community. So the regional blocks are being supported by the African Union because once one region achieves its goals and mandates or its desires, then it's easier to deal with regions other than individual countries. So it makes the process much more easier for integration of Africa and Africans. Yeah.
But which countries are the biggest supporters or largest contributors to the African Union and the unification of Africa movement?
Yeah, it's important for me to mention at this point that majority of African countries are low-income countries. That means that their economies are not big; they have small economies, and therefore, because they cannot even fund their own budgets, then it means, or it translates that the African Union as a bloc, the contributors are external partners. I can say the European Union, I can say the United States of America, and the new kid on the block, China, and now we are having also Russia coming into the equation, and other countries. So the largest contributors economically and monetarily are external partners, but the individual African countries contribute around 25% of the African Union's annual budget, and 75% comes from the external partners, which I've listed.
And what do you think? Do you think that the organization, this African Union, serves non-African interests? Like you see that how much they contribute to the development. Do you think that this external funding is done with a purpose?
The external funding, of course, those who fund the activities of the African Union at large may decide what the agenda could be, because minus the funds, then it means the African movement for integration and the African Union at large, its capacities will be reduced. So it thus means that the more we depend on external contributors, the more we will be indebted to them, and the more we will sing the song which they want us to sing. It's an unfortunate situation. But with African Rising, this is one of the areas where I think in the near future that will have to be looked into so that the African Union can fund itself. Then it can determine rightly what it serves to do and what it envisions to achieve.
And what do you think? Can the African Union overcome this pattern and become self-funded?
Yes, the African Union at some point will become self-sufficient, but it will take time because the members of the African Union are low-income countries. The levels of poverty in some of these countries are so huge. The budget deficits in these countries can only be achieved by external funders and external guarantors. It's a difficult thing, but I'm not ruling out that at some point all stars will align and the whole continent will be able to fund itself. But it's important that I note that it will take time for this to happen because of as I've explained, the levels of poverty, factors such as corruption, democracy and democratic processes in the country, human rights, and all these factors, they contribute much to the eventual state of Africa, where the African Union will be able to fund itself. But for now, it's not visible for the African Union to fund itself. It's so expensive for those countries and members to make those contributions.
what do you think? How much sacrifice does the African integration and take from individual countries, and how willing are they to contribute to the movement?
Every country has to contribute to the African Union, irrespective of its economic status, to affirm its commitment to the cause. So every country must set aside some funds which will be remitted to the African Union, so that the African Union is able to run itself fully and process its budget and plan for its futures. The African Union doesn't take much from countries, but instead it contributes much to countries in terms of visibility in the world affairs, and in terms of having that common voice where small countries cannot really be noticed, but in the umbrella body of the African Union, then the African Union, I think, is a good representative of the same. The contributions of each country, yes, no matter small how they are significant, and I don't think the African Union takes much, but instead it gives much back. Yes, so it's a safer to say that countries are better off in the African Union than without being in the African Union.
Other than that, are there some African countries that, besides all of those benefits, that do not see integration as an effective solution for the problem?
Yes. These factors are political. I'll talk about Morocco and the case of Western Sahara. Morocco believes that Western Sahara is part and parcel of the larger Morocco, while Western Sahara believes that it's an independent country away from Morocco, and it wants to determine its future. So for the longest time possible, Morocco was not part of the African Union or the Organization of African Unity because the African Union had recognized Western Sahara as a country on its own. And so yes, that's one of the countries. But however, later on, Morocco decided to rejoin the African Union, and now I think there's some form of agreement on the process of Western Sahara. Although the headline affirmations are still there, but finally, I know at some point an agreement will be reached on the question of Western Sahara. So that's one example where I think countries don't believe much in the African Union, but that is it. Apart from that, the liberation movements in South Sudan initially were at loggerheads because they wanted independence. So there was a problem in the Sudans, where I think the Southern Sudan believed in its right to exist as an independent country, and the larger Sudan viewed South Sudan as part and parcel of it. So these are some of the impetus affecting the larger African Union and some of the countries. But now, I think all countries are in the fold. All the 54 countries in the African continent all subscribe to the African Union. Yes.
We have seen 8 coups over the course of last 3 years in West Africa. Do you think that this pattern will change the formation or the deeper integration of the African Union?
The coup and the coup d'etats which have been witnessed for the last in the last 5 years in Africa, I'll talk about maybe about them in two ways. One, the Francophone coups in West Africa, that is in Burkina Faso, and the counter coups in Burkina Faso, the coup and the counter coups in Mali, the coup in Guinea, and the coup in Mali, the coup in Niger as the latest, and the coup in Gabon. These coups are largely a statement that these francophone countries are fed up with France. France seeks to, or France is running a system where all the budgets of these countries are approved in France. They use the French currency, and the central banks of these countries are in Paris. They are operated from Paris, and that one makes most of these countries overseas provinces of France according to the people of these countries. Then there's the issue of terrorism, where they think that now that France controls much of the affairs of these countries, it's not doing enough, either by omission or commission, and thus the people of these countries came up in arms and overthrew the existing order and now installed the military regimes, which are countries running these countries. So these coups, yes, as the African Union supports democracy and leaders who are elected by popular will. So the statement of the African Union has been condemning unequivocally these coups because of their undemocratic nature, and they want that the people should participate in selecting their leaders and not the military men. I will not look at it as such as an African Union problem, but as an external interference problem from France in West Africa. For the case of Sudan, the coup and the counter coups in Sudan are largely an ego-based affair where the military generals don't agree, and then one team then overthrows the other, and the other one tries to overthrow the other, and then we end up having this kind of serious security situation which is existing in Sudan. It's also important for me to note that Sudan could not have been where it is had it not been under a form of dictatorship for so long that the people were fed up, and an uprising came up which overthrew President Bashir, and then the military took that chance and then took over the reins of power.
I will sweep the topic a bit and ask you about your home country, Kenya. What is the main benefit of Kenya from the African Union, and how does the African Union serve the interests of Kenya?
Yes, Kenya is a major player. It's a major player in Africa. Until last year, that is 2022, Kenya was the third largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. But of course, right now, Ethiopia and Angola have surpassed it. Kenya has been an oasis of stability in the region, where insecurity is rife. Failed Somalia in the east, and unstable Ethiopia in the north, civil wars in Sudan, civil wars in Democratic Republic of Congo, the genocide in Rwanda, the instability of Burundi, the long-held war in northern Uganda between the government of Uganda and the resistance movements there. So Kenya plays a major role because it is at the center of a storm where the neighbors of Kenya are very unstable in terms of security, are doing poorly economically compared to Kenya. So Kenya serves as the base for the African Union to launch peace missions into these countries. Kenya currently is leading the negotiations for peace in Sudan, where the warring military factions the negotiations are being held. Kenya was the center of the negotiations for independence of South Sudan. Kenya was the center for the cessation of hostilities in wars, in the civil wars of Ethiopia, where the government of Ethiopia and the Tigray people signed their peace agreements. Kenya has been the center where most security apparatus in Africa operates. Kenya has been the center for the fight against terrorism and instability in Somalia, where the Kenyan army was sent into Somalia in 2011. So you see, the African Union uses Kenya in these areas to stabilize the region. And how do the interests of Kenyans are heard in the larger region, in the African Union? Yeah, as I said, the African Union and its constant support for integration is where Kenya benefits most, and it has enabled Kenya to develop. Of course, all these peace missions, all these negotiations are supported by the African Union, so exposing Kenya as a major player in the overall scheme of things in the African Union at large.
Now I want you to reflect a bit on the latest news, knowingly that Kenya and the European Union have signed an economic partnership agreement with the clear goal to enhance strategic cooperation and help the economic growth of Kenya. Do you consider the European Union a strong partner for Africa and especially for Kenya?
Yes, this is a recent development where the Kenya and the European Union signed an economic partnership agreement in Nairobi. There is a general feeling of a special treatment of Kenya by Kenya's peers in Africa, by the European Union and the Americas. It does not go well with our partners, the other countries in the East African region, because we go in as individuals instead of bargaining as a regional bloc. So that's one of the where our brothers and sisters in the region think that Kenya has selfish ambitions and is a major stumbling block to the integration of the region into the East African cooperation or community. This preferential treatment by the European Union and the Americas for Kenya has brought about hostility towards Kenya in terms of trading, in terms of movement of people, the Kenyan people into, for example, Tanzania, and the treatment Kenyans are giving is not that one of brotherhood, but majorly that one of suspicion of being traitors to the common good. And then I may further go to say that whereas it's within Kenya's rights to sign these agreements and partnerships, but it's also important for Kenya to notice that they are not alone in the region, and our brothers and sisters in other countries need to be roped in for that inclusivity and for the eventual creation of a political entity in the East African community, that's the federal states of the East African Community. This preferential treatment, then, it does not go well with our neighbors. The European Union is a strong partner of Africa. It majorly funds the African Union activities, which is okay. But again, we must look that the European Union is losing larger pieces of Africa or larger parts of Africa, majorly by acts of omission or commission. The European Union values, which the European people want to be identified by, such as democracy and human rights, are not being applied consistently across the world. That why is it? It is the African countries that must be democratic, whereas in the Middle East, there are supporting kingdoms, emirs, and emperors. Then there is a form of superiority complex where the European Union and its partners, in its view of Kenya, not really Kenya, in its view of Africa, they act as non-partners but as superiors, where their cultures and values are supposed to be of the highest order, and anything else is backwards, uncivilized, and it does not deserve to be done. As I've said before, the European Union, is losing Africa at a very fast rate, where I think, as we have seen in West Africa, as soon as yesterday, the French embassy in Niger was closed. Burkina Faso and other Western African countries have demanded that there are severing relations with the French people. And that's the European Union being pointed at. Then there are a lot of double standards in African affairs, in the way the European Union conducts itself towards Africa as compared to other parts of the world. We have not seen the European Union come together, being the major funders of the African Union, for the Sudan conflict, as they do in Ukraine. It's so different. In fact, the Sudan war does not exist. It does not make it to major news headlines. But all the time, we are hearing about Ukraine and how the war in Ukraine is barbaric. So it's a very bad thing to happen, because we view that it's because it's happening in Europe. But the European Union is doing little to condemn the same wars back home or back in Africa. Same as the handling of migrants, the Ukrainian migrants were treated fairly compared to migrants from Africa, who are left in the high seas where they drown, and nobody really seems to care. So these are some of the factors where the European Union, though a strong partner of Africa, is fast losing ground on Africa. For now, it's not a question of how, but when. Finally, will the European Union lose Africa? In the void the European Union left in Africa, other players have come in, such as China, which has become Africa's most important trading ally or partner in the last 2 decades. it has secured strategic needs such as resources and markets for its industries. And why this is happening is because China comes with no conditions attached. Yes, you are a dictatorship. We leave you at it. We don't want to impose you democracy. You are a monarchy. We leave you at it. We don't want to impose you democracy or human rights. We don't want to tell you who to love, who to hate, but the Chinese treat you as you are. And so it has led to the European Union and other partners saying that the partnership between African countries and China is controversial. But it's controversial to who and to whose eyes. If today you go to the ground in any one of the African countries, they will for sure tell you that China has had more impact on their lives and well-being than the European Union and its partners. It's also important for me at this point to mention that most of the African countries are moving towards the BRICS movement, which is being spearheaded by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are some of the areas where the European Union needs to ask itself, why is it losing so much of its power and control in Africa? They should treat these countries as partners. Accept that there are differences and that our differences are not largely based on another thing, but it's because of our values and systems cannot be the same. However, we can coexist despite all these differences. Yeah, so the European Union is a strong partner and it's now making inroads again. We are having countries which have never been to Africa, opening embassies all over Africa, because it shows that in the next few years, in the next 30 or so years, the major resources will be in Africa in terms of human capital, agricultural land, agricultural produce, and the minerals which will be used to run the world.
Yeah, there is no doubt that the future is African, maybe. Oh yeah, we heard some thought-provoking and also warning ideas for Europeans. But unfortunately we are arriving to the end of this podcast. So I want to ask you, for as a summary, do you think that the concept of the African Union will make Africa thrive? And will it solve these political, economic, and demographic issues that we discussed, such as, this massive youth bulge and the tension between ethnicities?
Yes, the overall goal or the overall picture, which I don't want us to miss, is that Africa will thrive through the African Union. If you look at what the African Union is doing on the ground, in terms of conflict resolution, peace and security, infrastructure, energy and development, agricultural development, trade and industrial development, democracy, law and human rights, health and nutrition, migration, labor and employment, sports and culture, education, science and technology, youth development, economic integration and private sector development, diaspora and civil society engagement, gender equality and development. You will notice that all these are pillars of the African Union, and they are trying to implement them across the continent. So in so doing, the African Union has come up with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, which aims to unifying the markets of Africa, so that to remove the trade barriers between different countries, between all countries, have a common African passport, integrate all cities by connecting them to high-speed railway lines in Africa, so that this movement and may be seamless in Africa, air transport development, and such. So those are some of the things that the African Union is really doing to uplift the people of Africa. And then the demographic issues which we are experiencing right now are in the next 50 years, Africa will be having the largest labor capital in the world. So that means as the rest of the world is depopulating, Africa is populating, and that will create a huge market, huge, insurmountable market for goods and products of other countries, as well as human labor. So this youth bulge, for now, it may look like it is a curse, if I can say so, but it's not, because with a massive labor capital, which will create development of industries, consumption of goods and services, then for sure Africa is the continent to look at in the near future. As for the political agendas in different countries, of course, that one is difficult, a bit difficult, if I may say, because of the sovereignty purpose. But I think with a common voice from the African Union, the integration of Africa into different regional blocks and eventually into the whole of Africa will make Africa thrive more, solve its problems economically and politically. I wish to end it at that. Yeah, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Omuri Nyandoro from the Egerton University, Kenya, for joining us in today's podcast, and I also want to thank the listeners who have made this far on the episode. Today, we highlighted that Africa is progressing towards unification and becoming more and more important in the world economy. For more details, check out the Diplomacy Instagram page and read our articles on Corvinus, and don't forget to tune in next time when we will have an extensive overlook on Russia. Until then, you can listen to the MCC podcast on various platforms where we discuss diverse topics weekly. Once again, thank you for joining us today. I was Marton Szücs with the Diplomacy podcast. I wish everyone a happy new year. See you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to this MCC podcast episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors, external contributors, and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.